The regular meeting of the Mishawaka Common Council from Monday, May 2nd, 2022 will please come to order. Good evening. For those of you who are with us here live and in person this evening, welcome. If you would take a moment to check your electronic devices and make sure that you have placed all of them on silent or turned them off. We had a brief conversation about hats earlier, and I appreciate everybody taking steps to bring themselves into compliance with that. For those of you who are participating remotely, once again, good evening. We welcome you as well. With regard to those participating remotely, members of the public are asked to place their microphone on mute during the meeting with the exception of any public hearing. At the appropriate point in the public hearing, I will invite the public to unmute their microphone for purposes of submitting such comments as they wish to make, one person at a time. All persons wishing to make public comments will be asked to first state their name and address for the record, and after completing the comment, members of the public will once again be asked to place their microphone on mute, and we thank everyone for their cooperation this evening. With that, we are going to have some special guests help lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'm going to ask our local Boy Scout representatives to come forward to the podium. If everybody would rise and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And then afterwards, Scouts, if you'll stay up here and give us your name and your school for the record. But gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. If in uniform, Scout salute. If not, hand over heart. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate you being here. And then if you would, one at a time, if you want to give us your name and your school, then you can go back and resume your seats.
My name's Henry Brown, and I go to Trinity School of Greenlawn.
My name is Ryan Zeiger, and I go to Schmucker Middle School.
My name is Logan Linsky, and I go to Schmucker Middle School.
My name is Nicholas Madlam, and I go to Grissom Middle School.
My name is Raymond Veslick, and I go to St. Pius X Catholic School.
My name is Oliver Michos. I go to St. Pius X Catholic School.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. We appreciate your help. And with that, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. DeMade?
Here.
Mr. Hazen?
Here.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Here.
Mr. Benicki?
Here.
Mr. Emmons? Mr. Belovich?
Here.
Mr. Compton?
Here.
Mrs. Volker?
Here.
Mr. Hicksonbaugh?
Here. Approval of the minutes of our regular meeting of April 19th, 2022. Are there any additions or corrections? Then hearing none, the minutes will stand approved as received from the clerk's office. Petitions, communications, remonstrance, and memorial.
Yes, Mr. President. We have appeal number 2022-10 to the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Common Council. This is a use variance to allow self-storage in C1 General Commercial, 1010 South Merrifield. This is signed by Brad Beer. We have appeal number 2022-13 to the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Common Council. This is a use variance to allow microblading services within a multi-tenant commercial strip center, C1 District at 4125 Grape Road. This is signed by Ronald Jors, owner of the property. We have petition number 2022-03 to the honorable members of the Common Council, City of Mishawaka, Indiana, petition to rezone from I-1 Light Industrial to R1 Single Family Residential, 1816 West 6th Street, and this is signed by Evan Forsland.
Thank you. This evening, we have no report of any special committee that I am aware of, nor do we have any ordinances on first reading. So we will move into resolutions.
Resolution number R 2022-10, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, amending Resolution R 2021-30 as amended, which adopted a plan for distribution of the proceeds of the City of Mishawaka's grant from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021.
Thank you. We will now move into the public hearing on proposed resolution 2022-10. Anyone wishing to speak in favor, please come forward to the podium. Although I will state for the record that in a relevant part, the amendment to our ARPA plan, which is reflected in this resolution, references a fairly limited technical matter. In January of this year, the federal government, in the guidelines that came out from the U.S. Treasury Department, provided local communities such as ourselves with enhanced flexibility to treat up to $10 million as lost revenue, which simplifies and streamlines the reporting process and then allows us to spend funds on any governmental purpose. So that is the limited revision to our ARPA plan that is in front of us, this evening. And with that prelude, if there is anyone else who wishes to speak in favor, please come forward. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? Is there anyone here with us this evening who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed resolution? If you would, please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor, in opposition to the proposed resolution? Thank you. Are there any council members who wish to speak? I just want to add my thanks for the record to Mrs. McGuire, who was very patient with me this past week and helped me work through some conversations. As always, she was very helpful, and as has been mentioned before, we have a very collaborative process that's in place here. We appreciate the administration's willingness to work with us. We had a very productive meeting led by Mr. Mamiletti and the special committee charged with the review of our ARPA funds this past week. So we are moving forward with this, and the approval of this resolution is simply another step in that process. But thank you to Becky for her help in getting us to this point. And with that, if there are no other questions or comments from the council, I will call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMade?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hicksonbaugh?
Yes.
The resolution passes 8-0.
This evening, we have no ordinances on second reading, so we'll move into privilege of the floor. At this point in time, members of the public are invited to the podium to speak with respect to non-agenda items only under privilege of the floor. Seeing no one, we'll extend that same invitation to those participating remotely under privilege of the floor. Thank you. Unfinished business.
Yes, Mr. President, we have Resolution R 2022-07, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Mishawaka, Indiana, approving a report of compliance with statement of benefits for certain property owners.
Thank you. We'll now move into the public hearing on proposed resolution 2022-07. Mr. Spear, good evening.
Good evening, President, members of the council. Name is Derek Spear, City Planner, offices here at City Hall. Property owners that have applied for either a real or personal property tax abatement must file a report with the council, and then in turn file with the auditor no later than May 15th. And the report reports the extent of which they are in compliance with the goals set forth at the time when the abatement was granted. Currently, we have 6 abatements in the city. All 6 require reporting for this year. All property owners have responded to our request to complete the statement of benefits form. And in summary, all 6 of the active abatements which require reporting are in compliance. They have exceeded, they have nearly met, or are working toward expectations. Construction for one of the active abatements, which is the Riverwalk project, has not yet begun. So a new abatement must be submitted and approved for this existing abatement because it will expire in May of this year. Since the prior reporting period, we've also had 2 abatements that dropped off the active list, and they no longer require reporting. The first one is for a real property abatement for a medical office building, which was attached to the St. Joseph Hospital, and that was a 10-year abatement that just recently expired. and the other one was for a assisted living facility for Bell Tower along Fur Road, and that one just expired. So I'm just going to give a summary a little bit of all 6 of the abatements, going from the earliest that was approved to the most recent. Barack River Rock, they received an abatement back in 2013 for the first phase of a mixed-use apartment building and first-floor retail space, which was along Mishawaka Avenue. Although approved in 2013, construction didn't begin until 2015 and was finished in 16. And the required reporting will be required through this year. They said that they had indicated that they had 5 to 8 jobs. So they said that this year's reporting that they had 5 jobs. Although not reported on the CF1, they also said they had a few additional jobs in some retail space that's actually along Mishawaka Avenue. There's a spa there. And then there was also another business called Bar Method that is vacant now, and they said that they're going to anticipate in leasing that space. So that they said that there could be additional 3 people in that space. Total payroll was listed at $230,000, which is higher than the $200,000 on the SB1. And then they said they have stated, they have actually invested $14.5 million on that project, which is an exceedance of the 14 to 17 million. So this project shall be considered in compliance since they've been in exceedance of both their employee goals and their investment, total investment. The next one is for WellPet. This is for an abatement approved in 2015 for equipment for a high-speed packaging line. Installation began in 2016 for this equipment and is currently in operation. Annual reporting will be required through 2023. And the net values upon completion of the project were estimated at $17.3 million in the SB1. Actual net values of the completed project was almost $26 million. So it exceeded the values by nearly $8 million. The total employment at the facility increased beyond what was originally projected. And when the abatement was filed, they had 115 employees, and then with an additional 4 jobs to be added, the total employment was reported at 120. So since both the employment and the payroll is higher, and then the investment was higher, they should be considered in substantial compliance at this time. The Riverwalk Development Group, they received an abatement for a proposed project on city-owned property by the Riverwalk. When originally submitted, it was supposed to be a $12.5 to $13.5 million project and was to include 63 rental units. They're reevaluating the project due to changes in the market downtown, some of the new apartments that are being built. And their original intent was to start construction during the second quarter of 2020. We have amended in a development agreement between the city and the developer, which extended the occupancy date until March of last year, but then COVID further delayed that even longer. So the development agreement will once again have to be amended and a new property tax submitted and approved because the current abatement expires actually this May. So at this time, it should be considered in compliance just because it's still ongoing and they will need a new abatement should they start the project. Lippert Components is the next one. They received a real and personal property abatement in 2017 for renovation of a building on Burkett Avenue. The proposed real estate improvements included in this abatement were originally estimated at $7.4 million, and they have been completed. And actual real estate improvements to date is nearly twice that at $13 million. The personal property improvements included in this abatement were estimated at just around $1.5 million, and all of these investments have been purchased and installed. And they've spent nearly, on the SB1, they've identified nearly $10 million in personal property equipment. Since this abatement was required for 10 years, we're going to have to add due reporting for this through 2028. And when they filed, they had existing employment at 247 with an additional 200 jobs to be added. At present, there are 392 jobs, which is a substantial increase from the 21 jobs when originally filed, but similar to the 395 employees reported last year. They do think they're going to get additional employment growth. They indicated in their SB1 that they acquired Furrion LLC, which is a distributor of appliances and electronics. So with that, they anticipate some additional employee growth throughout this year. And they did have their payroll listed at just over $20 million, which is more than twice that listed on the SB1 when they originally filed their abatement. So given that total investment in payroll exceeds the projected amounts and their employment levels are increasing, this should be considered in substantial compliance. The next one is J-Mill Packaging. They received an abatement in 2019 for a new folder and gluer for their property on Industrial Drive. Originally, they said it was $1.5 million, and this equipment is installed. It was installed in July of 2019. Annual reporting is required through this year, through this year. And when they filed, they said they had 139 employees with 12 positions to be added. So they did, total employment reported, they did say they had only 112, which was 27, a decrease of 27 positions and 39 less than what was projected. Employment did increase from last year, but with the COVID pandemic and disruption in business operations, they continued throughout the year. They recovered initially from a little bit from the slowdown, but with the workforce shortage, they have struggled to find people to fill some of their vacant positions. Wages for employees, though, have been increased to retain talent, and the starting pay for the new employees have been increased. So even with the drop in employment over the last 2 years, total payroll was listed at over $6.2 million, which is 28% higher than the $4.8 million listed on the original SB1. Given that payroll is higher than the projected amounts and the employee levels, while decreasing over the last 2 years due to COVID, but leveling off with an increase in just 4 positions over the last year, this abatement should be considered in substantial compliance. And the last one before you tonight is WellPet. This is for a building expansion and new equipment that was approved last year. There's information in the packet which provides an update on this project, and it was to include both real and personal property abatement. Construction on the real estate improvements included in this abatement were estimated at $14.7 million. It did begin last September, but after they did some engineering and design work, the decision was made to put on hold. They have spent just over $700,000 as they've listed on their CF1. And a majority of the personal property improvements included in this abatement, listed at just around $28 million, are also currently on hold, except with the purchase and installation of the odor control equipment. So actual personal property investment to date is $410,000 for the odor control equipment. This equipment is supposed to be scheduled this summer and installed by first quarter next year. And the abatement approved the economic revitalization area for a 3-year period. So should this project start up again, anything that they invest over the next 3 years in this property will have the benefit of the abatement. Also, when they filed, they had a decrease in some employment from when it was filed last year from 120 positions. Let's see here. It was listed at 120, which is a decrease from the 125, so they lost 5 positions. They did have an open workforce event, hiring event last week, I believe it was, or a couple weeks ago, and they had stated that they hired about 11 jobs in this. So their employment is increasing on this. So since they are currently, actively working on the project, this one should also be considered in compliance at this time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Spear? Mr. Belovich?
Just one question, Mr. Spear. On J-Mill, their jobs were reduced, but there wasn't any relocation of positions out of Mishawaka.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. It was just a workforce issue.
Thank you. Other questions? Thank you not only for your thorough summary this evening, but for the information that you always provide us in writing. It's very helpful. Couple questions with regard to Riverwalk development. And as you indicated, really, were on the cusp of their abatement coming to an end anyway in May of this year. But as you make reference to the potential for them to reinitiate an abatement request on that property with a different business model in mind, or business plan perhaps, do you have any idea when we should anticipate that that will come before us, or does that remain to be seen?
I think it's remained to be seen.
Okay. Not so much a question, but a comment, and I suspect others would agree with this sentiment. Pandemic and other unanticipated circumstances are already going to be in the backdrop with regard to these type of abatement requests. But my hope would be that with regard to this particular developer, given the history here, and with regard to this particular parcel, that when they decide to come to us, it's with as much certitude as they possibly can be, that they are actually going to break ground and to follow through on it, because it just seems counterintuitive to me that we have these abatements hanging out there without any tangible signs of action. So to the extent that you could pass that along to them as one council person's request, I would appreciate it. And then with regard to Wellness Pet, I appreciated, again, your summary. So let me try to restate what the takeaway is and tell me if I am accurately restating the information. But the real estate component, the construction of the building itself is on hold, as we understand it, based upon some decisions that have been made at the corporate level with regard to not moving forward at this time with that portion of the abatement. Correct. But that as referenced in your written material and your comments tonight, the odor remediation equipment has been purchased, and it's our understanding that that is in the process of being installed with a target date of first quarter of 2023.
Correct.
So right now, the only taxes that are being abated are those taxes that are associated with the equipment, the personal property taxes for the equipment that's been purchased, but there are no taxes that are being abated
Correct.
for construction that hasn't started.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Spear? You almost escaped without me asking any questions, but thank you again for the information. Is there anyone else in the chambers who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If so, please come forward.
Mr. President, members of council, Ken Prince, Executive Director of Planning Community Development, but I'm putting on my deputy mayor hat this evening. It's why I feel the need to come up. So I think it's important to note with Wellness Pet that we understand the frustration regarding not fully doing what they said they were going to do. That's a real issue for us as well, and I think that was well discussed as part of the committee meeting. On the other side of that, we want to stress the importance of not providing a reason for them to, my understanding is they've ordered the equipment, they haven't received the equipment as of yet. We want them to go full speed ahead on this equipment, and if you can imagine, and I heard the discussion Councilman Compton made 15 years ago, this has been a process, and it started with no remediation, and then it started with different equipment being installed, and that equipment wasn't that effective. Well, we heard when they presented the proposal for this equipment exactly scientifically how it was going to reduce the odor, and we can discuss the percentages all that we want, but the reality is this equipment, as we understand it, should make a significant difference. So we just want to stress that giving them no reason not to follow through as they've identified is very important, and we hope that they follow through and do it. The other thing I would say, just on a level of my understanding of tax abatement, is I'm not sure how much assessed valuation the odor control equipment is going to, essentially how much benefit they're going to get from the installation of that equipment. With the building addition, you see a very clear increase in assessed valuation based on the increased production. I'm not even sure how much benefit they're going to receive from the odor. Obviously, there's a benefit, there's a community benefit, there's a potential help with their litigation that's ongoing, but I'm not sure how much of a financial incentive we're talking about here from a city perspective that we're providing. So with those factors considered, we just want to encourage the council to consider it in compliance, reevaluate it as time moves on. and give them every reason to install it as they've identified in the committee meeting. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Deputy Mayor Prince?
We have no clue from when they first purchased that building and the business to now what they've cleaned up, percentage-wise, do we? I mean,
So it was indicated earlier at the committee meeting that and I don't want to call it a cleaning up, but the previous system that was installed, with the best of intentions, was an encapsulation system. So the idea was to encapsulate and then distribute it over a larger area where it has a different, basically a diffusing impact where it wouldn't impact so many people. And what we heard this evening was they anticipate that that affected basically 15% of the smell. The other thing, and we talked about this ad nauseum when we considered this the last time, but those percentages I equate it to noise. So if noise, there's a great commercial right now where it has a school band playing and the lady who has the car gets in the car and shuts it. It's not that she can't hear the sound, but it greatly reduces it where it's completely tolerable. And I equate that to potentially how the smellification would work as well. It's not whenever you cook something or fabricate something, there is going to be a processing odor that comes from it. The question is it tolerable or not tolerable? And clearly, based on the discussion, again, that we had, the discussion ad nauseum last time, was that this was much higher tech equipment than was installed last time. It essentially has the best ability in our mind of taking care of the issue, which we think is of the utmost importance from a community livability standpoint. So with that, I'll, again, be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Compton.
Thank you, Mr. Prince, thank you very much. And I could have asked Mr. Spear this, but what's common practice for a company that we give a tax abatement to with intent? Now, even though that they're not going to benefit from it because they decided at this point in time, they're not going to build the building, it's kind of on hold, is what we heard, but we also heard that it's not in the near future, it's not in the future plans at the moment. So, we're not sure if it's going to get built or not. Is it common for those folks to come back to the city and talk to us and say, hey, here's where we're at? Or is it just kind of happen? And I got on them for, I asked, did you notify the city? There's no real responsibility to do that, I imagine, but I just thought that it made sense to me. Do you have any comments on that?
We concur. I mean, we typically try not to bother the businesses that we have out there. We would like to think that they would notify us. But I also know from a corporate standpoint, and I don't know how else to put this, but the J Mill Packaging of the world, we have a personal relationship. They're owned locally. In this case, as you heard this evening, those representing aren't the ones making the decision. So in terms of how it's presented, I think it really relies on the process to bring out the answers to the questions that at a local company level, they would be more free. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, particularly with large corporations, but at the same time, there's accountability. The other thing I want to mention regarding the Riverwalk one that's expiring, from the administration side, we think the moving forward on projects has been an issue with our past development agreements. And we are now drafting language that gives them a little extra time, but not a lot of extra time in terms of their execution, or the development agreement will expire automatically. So we understand that COVID was an exception, and we're hoping that doesn't go forward, but at the same time, we're taking action on the other side of that to try to move things forward, or at a minimum, be able to move forward on the property with somebody else.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Compton. Other questions for Mr. Prince? I think you can.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? If so, please come forward. Then is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed resolution? Is there anyone physically present who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed resolution? Please come forward. And is there anyone participating remotely who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed resolution? Are there any council members who wish to speak? Well, again, thank you to Mr. Spear and the staff for the information that they provided us and the information that both Mr. Prince and Mr. Spear have shared this evening. One of the things that always jumps out at me as, conversations take place throughout the city with regard to tax abatement, it's powerful information that we have in the council packet, and that's available to the public. But I would suspect most people would not be able to identify how many abatements we've done in the history of Mishawaka going way back when. And if the spreadsheet we have is accurate, we're at a whopping 60, just over 60 of them. So we always say that we're judicious with tax abatements. It's important to the administration and the council that we're careful with how we make these investments in our corporate partners. And I believe that we have been judicious over the course of time. And as was referenced earlier, prior to this evening's meeting, we engaged in a meeting of our Budget and Finance Committee to take a look at the wellness pet, sorry, bungled the name again, the wellness pet tax abatement, the most recent one that had the odor control component explicitly embedded within it. And the wellness pet continues to be, in my opinion, a good corporate citizen of Mishawaka. Our local representatives who have appeared in front of us, both this evening and in the past, in my experience, have always been forthright with us and have shared information, and I appreciated what we heard from everyone this evening. Since our colleague, Mr. Emmons, isn't here, I feel duty-bound to somewhat speak on his behalf. It continues to be a monumental issue for the people who live in close proximity to Wellness Pet, that odor has not been remediated. And I think it's fair to look at this not only in the context of this most recent abatement, but going back to a series of abatements where odor control equipment has once before, at least, been approved by this council. And what we've been led to believe is, although I'm confident that it was not quantified as such, and Mr. Prince makes a good point, you're not going to get to 100% efficacy here. But we started out and we're at 15% right now, which is, I think, in everybody's mind, unacceptable. And our hope was when we approved the last one that we were going to be well beyond 15%. As high as in the 90th percentile. Things have happened, unintended consequences have arisen, and some decisions have been made at a corporate level that I don't think are in keeping with our expectations as a community with regard to how this project was going to play out. As I said in the committee meeting, if this was the initial vote on the Wellness Pet tax abatement, although Mr. Prince makes valuable points. And although we want to continue to partner with Wellness Pet, if this was the presentation this evening, I would be voting against it. I've given serious consideration against voting against this compliance report as being in substantial compliance. But on balance, I'm willing to give it one last opportunity to work. And I appreciate the leap of faith that Wellness Pet has made to continue to put the odor remediation equipment in place, even though the construction of the building itself that it was originally going to be attached to has not occurred. That's an act of good faith in my mind, and I really hadn't thought about that until Mr. Prince brought it up. So Wellness Pet is to be congratulated for that. I would say this. Construction schedules, supply chain problems, cost of labor aside, if next year when this report is in front of us, from one man's opinion, if we're no further down the line to that odor having been significantly remediated, I will never vote in favor of compliance for this tax abatement again, simply because I don't think it's fair to the people who live in that neighborhood to do so. So whatever can be done that is humanly possible to bring this much more in compliance. Substantially compliant doesn't mean it has to be perfect, but there has to be a heck of a lot more compliance than 15%. And I'm not voting in favor of a 15% solution ever again. So we will continue to work with Wellness Pet and value them as a corporate citizen. We appreciate the fact that those jobs are here and have been kept in the community for these many years, but it's got to get done. And sooner or later, the benefit of the bargain that we thought that we were obtaining when we approved the tax abatement goes away if there isn't a noticeable improvement in that odor control. So if Wellness Pet could stay in touch with us, and again, there are some corporate decisions that take place beyond the local level that are beyond the control of the folks who work in the facility in Mishawaka. But the more that we know about this, the better we feel. And the more that we can communicate with our constituents who are really on our backs about this, the better it is for everybody involved, including Wellness Pet. So again, thank you to the local representatives for being here. But again, I want the record to reflect, I will never vote in favor of anything having to do with this Wellness Pet tax abatement unless there is significant progress and improvement in that odor remediation between now and this time next year. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council? Mr. Belovich.
Yes, Mr. President, just one thing for Mr. Prince. I know over the last couple of years, because of COVID, we've not had the companies here represented physically, but I would hope that as we move forward in the future, even though maybe all of these companies will be in compliance, I think it's a good idea that if we have questions, we can have them here and we'll have an opportunity to ask those questions.
Please, Mr. Prince.
So we kind of got out of our normal operating procedure, but I will note that we've only ever had them come in when there have been questions. And we have, at any point in time, and even during COVID, we've had, even if we had to do it Zoom, we have the ability to ask of them to participate and get questions. So, Councilman Belovich, anytime that you have a question, even outside of this process, we have the ability to call them and ask those questions. As a matter of ordinary operating procedure, though, we don't feel the need, if the abatement is in compliance, to call, they're, like everybody, have too much on their plate already. So we only want to call them in if you do in fact have questions and we can resolve it. We don't want to have a standard time for them to come in and be questioned unless it's necessary.
So what I'm understanding then is in the past, when companies have come in, it's only been when they've been out of compliance?
During my tenure, yes. Well, not when they're out of compliance, but when there have been questions or concerns identified by the council. That's when we've called them in.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Prince, since we have him in our sights once again? For the record, I would agree with that the administration has been very helpful in facilitating these meetings when we've requested specific tax abatement recipients to come in, and I can't recall a recipient who has not availed themselves of the opportunity to come in and speak to us. So, but certainly we can review the process going forward and tailor it as meets the needs of the council in this era. But thank you. Mr. Hazen.
Mr. President, I have a question maybe for you or maybe for the council attorney. If I vote for this as a whole report yes tonight, will that bind me to a yes vote on one that's going to expire in a month? Yep. It's going to expire. Okay. I think I know the answer, but I just want to make sure that we're okay with it.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hazen. Other questions or comments from the council? Then hearing none, I call for the question.
Question.
Madam Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Mrs. DeMaid?
Yes.
Mr. Hazen?
Yes.
Mr. Mamalenti?
Yes.
Mr. Benicki?
Yes.
Mr. Belovich?
Yes.
Mr. Compton?
Yes.
Mrs. Volker?
Yes.
Mr. Hixenbaugh?
Yes.
Resolution passes 8-0.
New business. Is there any new business to come before the council? Mrs. DeMaid.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to let everyone know that the West End Neighborhood Watch meeting will be next Tuesday, May 10th, 7 p.m. It's going to be held in the activity room at St. Bavo School. This month's guest will be Mishawaka Police Department Sergeant Bartlett from the Street Crimes Unit, along with his partner, K-9 Officer Bailey. I want to mention that due to the sensitivity of issues discussed, there will be no live stream available for this meeting. And I would also like to advise parents that some of the material discussed may not be suitable for young children. So please keep that in mind if you are thinking of bringing your child to this meeting. Parking is in the fenced area the lot south of the church at 8th and West, and all are welcome and encouraged to attend. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Mamalenti.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick announcement regarding the Twin Branch Neighborhood Watch meeting that was originally scheduled for May 18th. Our speaker, Mr. Mayor Dave Wood, has another engagement, which I full-heartedly encourage him to participate in, and also encourage our residents to attend as well. That conflict that the mayor has is the Mishawaka Police Memorial Service on the same date, May 18th. So we will push back our May 18th meeting to June 15th. It'll remain at 7 o'clock and remain at fire station number 4. And as of now, the guest speaker remains Mayor Dave Wood. So no meeting on May 18th, and the meeting will be pushed to June 15th.
Thank you. Other items of new business? Just a couple brief reminders then. Tomorrow is Election Day for those who don't follow that as closely as some of us do. And I think I'm on solid ground to say that whatever the political persuasion and affiliation of the people who sit up here, we're all in favor of the maximum number of people exercising their franchise and going out to vote. What better time to discuss that when we have a room full of Cub Scouts and how that serves all of us in a democracy, that we have an active Boy Scouts. Oh, boy, now I offended them when I was trying to compliment them by calling them something else. The Boy Scouts of America, I am sorry. But the point still stands that what better way is it to participate in a democracy than to vote? So please, whatever your political affiliation is, consider voting tomorrow. And then last but not least, on the topic of the Boy Scouts, for those council members who are able to stick around, we have, and it occurs to me that we had a late arrival, and since I embarrassed all the other Boy Scouts, boy, I almost did it again, since I embarrassed all the other Boy Scouts by having them stand and introduce themselves and tell us what school they attend, for our late arrival, if you want to stand and introduce yourself and tell us what school you attend, that would be great. Kevin, welcome. Thank you for being here this evening. So, for any council members who have the time, if you want to stick around, the Scouts are trying to complete, as I understand it, one of their required tasks for their badges. So they have a few brief questions to ask us. And again, thank you for being here and helping us out with the Pledge of Allegiance. We appreciate it this evening. So with that, if there is no other new business to come before the council, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
We are adjourned. Thank you, folks.